Gun control proposals and their arguments.
The supposed quietude of a good man allures the ruffian, while on the other hand, arms, like law, discourage and keep the invader and the plunderer in awe, and preserve order in the world as well as property. The balance of power is the scale of peace. The same balance would be preserved were all the world destitute of arms, for all would be alike. But since some will not, others dare not lay them aside. And while a single nation refuses to lay them down, it is proper that all should keep them up. Horrid mischief would ensue were one half the world deprived of the use of them. For while avarice and ambition have a place in the heart of man, the weak will become a prey to the strong. The history of every age and nation establishes these truths, and facts need but little arguments when they prove themselves. Thomas Paine, Thoughts on Defensive War, 1775.
This section addresses a broad range of the most commonly presented questions and statements surrounding gun control. Despite the seemingly endless stream of new arguments, most of them are simply rewordings of old ones, packaged differently but grounded in the same core beliefs. Some of these topics are explored in greater detail, while others are touched upon more briefly. This approach serves two purposes. First, it helps to keep the scope of this book manageable, rather than expanding into an exhaustive 800-page treatise. Second, many of these topics have already been covered extensively by other authors, often with greater depth and precision. In these cases, I provide a summary while encouraging readers to explore those sources further to gain a full understanding. The conversation around gun control is filled with emotional appeals and well-worn cliches, but it's important to remember that the core of the debate is about fundamental rights and human nature. Throughout history, the ability to defend oneself has been a cornerstone of individual liberty, and no amount of legislation can change that basic truth. Laws may attempt to shape behavior, but as C.S. Lewis wisely noted, you cannot make men good by law. Attempts to do so by restricting firearms have repeatedly failed, and they ignore the deeper issues at play, issues that can only be addressed through understanding, education, and the preservation of freedom. Private sales and the gun show loophole.
But at too many gun shows, a different dangerous trend is emerging. Some of these gun shows have become illegal arms bazaars for criminals and gun traffickers to buy and sell guns on a cash-and-carry, no-questions-asked basis. I believe this should be the law of the land. No background check, no gun, no exceptions. Bill Clinton.
Apparently, he wasn't aware that 2 years prior, the National Institute of Justice found only 2% of criminal guns came from gun shows. Gun control has aimed at private sales for quite some time, essentially since the NFA in 1934. The anti-Second Amendment media, ASDM, would have you believe that most private sales are somehow malicious or dangerous. However, many of these transactions are just ordinary activities for gun enthusiasts. Some sellers are simply swapping out items from their collections or selling guns they no longer need. Others are going through hard times and need the extra cash. There's even a segment of people who prefer to buy privately because they don't want the government involved in their personal dealings. The reality is that the small percentage of private sales conducted to avoid background checks will happen regardless of the law. Stricter restrictions would only incentivize illegal transactions, leading to a larger black market and more theft, making the situation worse. Ultimately, this would destroy a harmless hobby for countless gun owners while doing little to stop criminal behavior. The myth of the gun show loophole. The so-called gun show loophole is mostly a myth. It depends on who you're talking to. Some, like Bernie Sanders, use the term to refer broadly to private gun sales, which are perfectly legal. Meanwhile, others, particularly in the media, seem to believe that gun shows are a free-for-all where no background checks are conducted. This perception is false. In reality, any dealer who sells firearms at a gun show must follow the same rules as if they were selling from a storefront. According to the ATF, a gun show is merely an extension of the dealer's business. Private sales at gun shows are also often subject to state laws requiring background checks. For example, in Michigan, private sellers can't sell a handgun without completing a form with law enforcement or having the transaction facilitated by a licensed dealer who conducts a background check. Further statistics on gun shows. Data from gunfacts.info illustrates the minimal impact of gun shows on crime. Only 0.7% of convicts bought their firearms at gun shows, while 39.2% obtained them from illegal street dealers. Fewer than 1% of crime guns were obtained at gun shows. This is a decrease from a 1997 study that found 2% of guns used in criminal offenses were purchased at gun shows. The FBI concluded that no firearms acquired at gun shows were used to kill police. In contrast to media myth, none of the firearms in the study were obtained from gun shows. Only 5% of metropolitan police departments believe gun shows are a problem. Only 3.5% of youthful offenders reported obtaining their last handgun at a gun show. 93% of guns used in crimes are obtained illegally, not from gun stores or gun shows. At most, 14% of all firearms traced in investigations were purchased at gun shows. But this includes all firearms that police traced, whether or not they were used in crimes, which overstates the acquisition rate. Gun dealers are federally licensed and must follow stringent rules for sales, whether at a storefront or gun show. Most crime guns are bought off the street from illegal sources, 39.2%, or through straw man purchases by family members or friends, 39.6%. Three-day Charleston loophole. When a background check is conducted through the NICS system, there are three possible outcomes: proceed, denied, or delayed. Delays can happen for various reasons, such as when someone opts not to provide their social security number, or if the system is simply overwhelmed with applications. The rule states that if the background check status remains delayed for more than 3 business days without an update, the gun can be transferred to the buyer. This safeguard is in place to prevent potential backdoor gun control, ensuring that individuals aren't left indefinitely waiting for their firearm due to bureaucratic delays. This rule was dubbed the Charleston loophole after Dylan Roof's 2015 mass shooting in a Charleston, South Carolina church, where 9 people were tragically murdered. Roof had a marijuana possession charge that should have disqualified him from purchasing a firearm under existing laws, but his record wasn't updated in time. After 3 days of no response, the sale proceeded, allowing Roof to buy the handgun he later used in the massacre. 2 months after the purchase, the FBI contacted the gun dealer, instructing them to deny the sale. Unfortunately, this call came 12 days after the shooting. Former FBI Director James Comey blamed the shooting on the 3-day rule, implying that the process needed to be extended. However, the timing of the FBI's follow-up raises questions about whether the delayed call was simply an attempt to cover their failure or a reflection of the FBI's detachment from recent events. The 3-day rule is crucial to prevent indefinite denials due to bureaucratic inefficiency. Extending this period could easily lead to scenarios where individuals are unjustly prevented from exercising their Second Amendment rights, simply due to the government's failure to manage background checks in a timely manner. No-fly, no-buy terror loophole. The no-fly, no-buy proposal gained traction as a gun control measure aimed at barring individuals on the terrorist watch list from purchasing firearms. While it may seem logical at first glance, after all, no one wants terrorists to have guns. The real issue lies in how the watch list is managed and who ends up on it. The case of Representative Tom McClintock from California highlights the dangers of such policies. McClintock was erroneously placed on the no-fly list due to a mistaken connection to the IRA. As an elected representative, it took him several months to get off the list. If it took him that long, imagine how difficult it would be for an ordinary citizen to fight such a bureaucratic error, both in time and money. McClintock himself summed it up best.
If your fundamental constitutional rights can be withdrawn at a bureaucrat's whim, then the Bill of Rights means nothing.
This underscores the core concern with the no-fly, no-buy proposal. It relies on secretive and often flawed lists with little to no due process. The NRA faced heavy criticism for opposing the bill, but their unlikely ally in this fight was the ACLU. The ACLU argued that the proposal relied on
vague and overbroad criteria and secret evidence to place individuals on blacklists without a meaningful process to correct government error and clear their names.
The no-fly, no-buy measure gained prominence after the 2016 Orlando nightclub shooting by Omar Mateen, who had been on and off the terror watch list twice. The fact that Mateen was off the list at the time of his firearm purchases didn't stop politicians like Senator Harry Reid from using his crime as justification for the policy. Oddly, Reid and others couldn't explain how Mateen's inclusion on the list would have prevented the shooting, considering he wasn't on the list at the time. The push for such legislation seems less about preventing violence and more about expanding government control over gun ownership, leveraging fear and crisis to gain traction. One must also consider the ever-expanding definitions of terrorist or extremist. In a 2009 Homeland Security assessment titled Right-Wing Extremism, concerns were raised about militia groups, and the document warned about potential threats from veterans, pro-life advocates, and people wary of federal overreach. This vague labeling can easily become a tool for political persecution, as in the case of Schaefer Cox, a militia leader from Alaska, who was arrested and sentenced to 26 years as a political prisoner based on what he said during a speech. The list of people erroneously placed on the no-fly list ranges from politicians like Senator John Lewis and Senator Ted Kennedy to actors, journalists, and even infants. The numbers of those on the list range from tens of thousands to over 1 million, further underscoring the inherent problems with this policy. Ultimately, using such a flawed system as a basis for denying someone their Second Amendment rights is both unconstitutional and dangerous. Red flag laws, ERPO, social credit systems, and tyranny. Red flag laws, also known as Extreme Risk Protection Orders, ERPO, have been heavily promoted as common-sense gun control measures designed to prevent individuals deemed dangerous from possessing firearms. These laws allow police or family members to petition a court to temporarily remove firearms from a person who is considered a threat to themselves or others. On the surface, they may seem reasonable, but these laws raise significant constitutional concerns, particularly regarding due process and the potential for abuse. Red flag laws operate in a manner that can easily be compared to a modern-day witch hunt, where the accused is often presumed guilty until they can prove their innocence. These laws allow for the confiscation of firearms based on accusations alone, without the accused having the opportunity to defend themselves beforehand. The burden of proof typically falls on the individual whose rights have been revoked, requiring them to navigate a costly and time-consuming legal process to regain their firearms and Second Amendment rights. A recent example of the potential for abuse in these laws can be seen in a 2021 Valentine's Day tweet from the ATF. In a tone that was intended to be humorous, the ATF encouraged people to turn in their former partners if they were involved in illegal gun sales. The tweet read, "Valentine's Day can be a perfect time to turn in your ex who buys and sells guns illegally." While seemingly lighthearted, this tweet highlights a serious issue. Red flag laws can be weaponized by individuals seeking revenge or attempting to settle personal scores. Imagine an ex-spouse, disgruntled neighbor, or angry coworker making a false report, knowing that it could lead to law enforcement confiscating someone's legally owned firearms. This risk is not theoretical. States like Maryland, which passed red flag laws, have seen reports that a significant portion of the ERPO filings are frivolous. For example, in Prince George's County, Maryland, within just a few months of the law's enactment, officers had collected more than 132 firearms and 35,000 rounds of ammunition based on red flag reports, with many of these cases later being revealed as attempts to get even rather than genuine concerns for public safety. These laws also mirror the unconstitutional nature of other preemptive policing tactics, such as civil asset forfeiture, where property can be seized based on suspicion alone, without any actual criminal conviction. Both red flag laws and civil asset forfeiture rely on predictive policing, treating someone as a criminal before they have committed any crime. Predictive policing has been deemed ineffective by studies such as those conducted by Rand Corporation, but this hasn't stopped its continued implementation. Red flag laws are dangerous because they erode the bedrock principles of due process, shifting the burden of proof onto the individual who must prove they are not a danger. Imagine facing legal fees, public scrutiny, and the loss of your Second Amendment rights, all because someone made an accusation that you had no chance to contest beforehand. In a world where predictive policing is becoming more common, the potential for abuse grows. States like New York have even floated proposals to require individuals to submit their social media profiles and search history as part of background checks for firearms purchases. This isn't just a gun control issue, it's a liberty issue, a social credit system where every aspect of your behavior, from your online activity to your personal associations, could be used to determine your rights, should be alarming to everyone, not just gun owners. This brings us to the broader concept of a social credit system. Imagine a future where your right to own a firearm, or any other right, could be affected by factors such as your social media behavior, medical history, or even your purchasing habits. The potential for this level of control is not just a dystopian fantasy, it's already being implemented in countries like China, where social credit systems determine everything from travel privileges to internet speed. The groundwork for such a system is already being laid in the US, where tech companies and financial institutions are starting to restrict services based on ideological leanings. This isn't just about gun control. This is about social engineering on a grand scale. If a system like this were to be implemented fully, it could result in your rights being contingent upon your compliance with the government's or society's prevailing ideology. Predictive policing, social credit systems, and red flag laws are all manifestations of a creeping authoritarianism that seeks to control every aspect of our lives. While gun control advocates may claim that these measures are about safety, the reality is that they are about control. And once that control is established, it can and will be expanded to other areas of our lives. As we've seen with social media platforms and financial institutions like PayPal and Shopify, these entities are already restricting access to services for gun-related businesses and individuals. Operation Choke Point, a government initiative that pressured banks to stop doing business with firearm dealers, shows how far-reaching and coordinated these efforts can be. Though Operation Choke Point was officially ended, the pressure on banks and businesses to cut ties with the gun industry has not. Many financial institutions and tech companies have continued to impose their own restrictions, influenced by political and social pressures. In conclusion, red flag laws, predictive policing, and social credit systems represent a dangerous trend toward treating citizens as guilty until proven innocent. These systems erode fundamental rights, starting with the Second Amendment but potentially extending much further. What begins as an effort to control firearms can quickly turn into a broader effort to control society itself. Limiting the number of firearms you can own or amount of munition. Let's begin with a quote from a Slate article.
The 27 words of the Second Amendment don't say anything about how many guns someone can own in America.
However, the word infringe in the Second Amendment is quite specific. It means to weaken, break, undermine, violate, or encroach. What the author of that Slate piece likely didn't realize was that they were touching on the age-old debate between Federalists and Anti-Federalists. Anti-Federalists believed extra protections were necessary, including the Bill of Rights, to safeguard individual and state rights against federal overreach. Federalists, on the other hand, feared that listing rights would lead people to assume that only enumerated rights were protected. As Lawrence Hunter explained,
during the Constitutional Convention, Madison resisted a Bill of Rights because he believed that it would be impossible to avoid an unintended and undesirable negative pregnant unless every conceivable right were enumerated. When Madison finally came around to supporting a Bill of Rights, he offered the 9th and 10th Amendments as bulwarks against the negative pregnant. These amendments stated explicitly that rights not enumerated in the Constitution were not denied to the people, and that powers not enumerated in the Constitution nor prohibited to the states therein were reserved to the states or the people.
Despite this, the idea of limiting the number of guns someone can own or the amount of ammunition they can purchase isn't just idle speculation from anti-gun activists. It has been promoted by lawmakers in states like California and Virginia, and praised by gun control groups like the Giffords Law Center. While this isn't a new concept, it has gained traction and is being enacted in some states. The argument often used is that, according to the ATF, a percentage of firearms found at crime scenes were purchased in bulk, implying that people are buying up guns to resell them to criminals. The problem with this argument is that reselling firearms without a license is already illegal. These laws focus on anomalies and extreme cases to justify sweeping regulations that affect millions of law-abiding gun owners. They don't prevent gun violence. At most, they redirect criminal activity elsewhere. What many gun owners may not realize is that when multiple handguns are purchased within a 10-day period, dealers are already required to fill out a separate form and submit it to the ATF. This means the ATF already tracks multiple firearm purchases. There's no clear indication of what is done with these forms once they're submitted, but it highlights the fact that the government is already monitoring bulk purchases. Another common argument for limiting gun purchases is the idea that people are buying guns in bulk to resell them in states with stricter gun laws. The Giffords Law Center claims,
states with weak gun laws attract traffickers who make multiple purchases and then resell those firearms in states with stronger gun laws.
but what this really demonstrates is that these laws are creating a black market. Basic economics tells us that reducing supply drives up prices, which increases the incentive for illegal trafficking. If the price of firearms increases due to a lack of supply, criminals will find other ways to obtain them, including theft. What these states have done is punish law-abiding citizens while creating lucrative opportunities for criminals. In conclusion, limiting the number of firearms or the amount of ammunition someone can own doesn't stop gun violence. It simply creates a more robust black market and criminalizes ordinary people.